For those of you that don't know, my name is Kiran Trace. I am a non-dual teacher. I am also a rascal and a rebel and a truth teller. And I like to, I like to kick ass. I like to challenge assumptions, and I like to kind of throw truth in a really, really fine spotlight to make sure it's true. This is Brooke Thomas, who I first got to know as a student. And we had a fantastic life together. And Brooke sort of awoken into her original nature in the community of our teaching and helped contribute a lot to the Kiran Trace community in my teaching. As well, she runs an amazing podcast called Bliss and Grit. Those of you guys that watch it, it's an amazing, or listen to it. It's a great shout out. And that's Vanessa, the co-host, also beautiful student that works a lot with me. And so, one of the things that that I first want to just mention is that in my journey, please come on in and don't feel pressured by that, by the overfocus. So one of the things in my journey is that I started life in a really violent household with real violent family. And I learned about sexual misconduct, sexual violation, and sexual abuse very young, and managed to live a life way into my mid-20s that was my experience of life. Brooke is also a survivor with her own story. And so part of the reason that I wanted to have this conversation in this hall is that both of us are actual survivors, and we are both awakened into original nature, and we both work as teachers and influencers, and we have a fair amount of stuff that we would like to talk about. And we think if the conversation is led by some of the survivors, then we have a chance to have a real conversation. And as much as I appreciate all of the opportunity for conversation led by non-survivors, people who are just scientists collecting data, and I appreciate the fact that they've been given spotlights, so they open the door, we really actually need the survivors to be a part of the conversation. So we're going to talk about sexual awakening. We're going to talk about what that really means, and we're also going to talk about misconduct in the field of spirituality and spiritual leaders. And we're going to be a little interactive and get some of your feedback and play with you guys as well. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Brooke.
Thank you. So Kiran introduced us, but I'm primarily here as a elicitor, facilitator of this conversation. And I think a really good place to start with the ground that we know we want to cover is that, so in our culture, and also in our community, in our spiritual community, there are some pretty profound blind spots about our sexual natures. We don't talk about them. We don't talk about what healthy sexuality really is, what healthy sexuality looks like. And so I feel like that might be a good container to start with, because we get to be here having the conversation, and it would be nice to lay out health. What does health look like in our sexual natures?
Okay, so one of the challenges that we really have is we have an avoidance of the conversation of sex. We have that in our own houses. Each of us growing up in our family lives, there was a profound blind spot even in our own homes. And we certainly find that in our spiritual community, in our spiritual homes, big blind spots in it not being spoken about. So some of the very basics is that when we start to put an awareness on sexuality, we start to see a number of really remarkable, interesting, threatening, triggery things. And one of the most interesting things when we put an awareness on sexuality is we start to see that sexuality is based in our brain development as well as our hormonal development. So, and there's a certain way that those who identify as male, sexuality works for them, and there's a very different way that those who identify as female, it works for them. And it's very difficult to put yourself in the shoes of the other, because they are so different. So let's start with the adolescent time period of which all this brain development and hormonal development gets turned on for all of us, because we've all been there. And if you are male, there's something very interesting, which is that one day this incredible, chronic, uncomfortable urge begins in your system. And it is intense. And it just turns on fully one day out of the blue. Now, for women, we don't have anything like this in our sexuality. We could not imagine what that is like. For females, the closest thing that would be like is when you are so incredibly frustrated and you just need to scream. Like that emotional sense is what the physical sense is in the male body. Now, some interesting aspects between the two sexualities, when we actually put some awareness on there, we see a couple of things. One, male sexuality has a lot to do with just physicality. Starts as a very strong physical urge. If we look at male fantasy, we see all kinds, especially the adolescent male, where it's just really pure, real pure sexuality. We see all kinds of just the pure physicality is the turn on. So it's like naked bodies pressed together is the turn on. And the fantasy life is all kinds of variations of the physical sensations. Over in the female sexuality, in the adolescent female, we don't have that at all. The sexuality is entirely emotional. It's completely wired to a story. And if you look at female sexuality, you're looking at hours and hours of romantic comedies. You're looking at fantasies about weddings. And what you're seeing is an emotional story of loyalty and bonding. So you're seeing in the female sexuality, right at the base root, this kind of a movement. Now, what's really also interesting about the differences and the diversity of it is that in the male piece, because it's purely physical and it's this movement coming out of the body that's very sudden, very uncomfortable, very urgent, turns on one day, totally based in physicality, it doesn't align to things like morality or ethics. So things like consent or, these sorts of things don't impact just the pure sexuality running in an adolescent male. And so things like, being physically attracted to a parent or an aunt or a mother or a younger sibling or a younger cousin. These things are very normal from the point of view of male sexuality. It's about a physical movement. People who are younger don't get stopped because of a morality if you're just listening to the male sexuality. But on the female side, it's entirely about consent because it requires for that emotional story the partner to be face to face devoting their life in this incredible loyalty to another person. So for a female sex life and sexual fantasy and turn on, it's entirely based in consent. And both are completely biological movements. And there's some very credible and beautiful research that points all the way to male sexuality, where that male ancestor of all of us, to actually be alive and keep our species alive, that seed has to go everywhere. So these types of movements are vital for that. And that's gene information that's still in the system. For the female, we see the same thing. We've got this biological history where we've got an actual imperative that if we engage sexually, it will create procreation. And in pregnancy, we are very vulnerable and we require the loyalty and the standbyness of the partner, the male partner, to support that period. So we've got this very credible scientific research that points to the biology of this. But in our inability to be aware and just look at what's happening in our own sexuality, we start throwing shame and blame and storytelling all over all of this stuff. Now, something that's also really interesting is that in the male sexuality is gene material that has a very real possibility of rape. That many of us, even people in this room, are here as the product of rape. So there's an informational package in that male sexual movement that says this is a probability, that rape is a real probability. And if there's a biological imperative to get seed out as much as possible, rape is a possibility. In the female side of things, it's really, really difficult for a female to put herself in the shoes of a male and understand how that sexuality is moving and understand the urgency and the physicality of it, because we don't have anything like it. For women, it's really, really a different situation. Now, if we are looking at these two systems that are very, very different in their original makeup, and if we are not afraid to actually look at it, some of the things we see in the female sexuality is we see a real movement where they will abandon themselves, give up everything of themselves in order to have the attention of whatever's turning them on. And so, especially with an adolescent girl, we see all kinds of movements where she is continually letting anybody do anything to her for the attention. So we've got this real potential toxic mix if we don't actually bring awareness to it, where we have this really chronic male urgency that without any awareness, without any real help and support with integration, is moving in a way that's like urgent and very physical and very necessary. And on the female side of time, on the side, we've got this like desperate for any kind of validation and attention because it proves loyalty, and it's a huge part of the sexuality. So you can sense the toxic mix here if this isn't actually supported with integration. Of course, we are much more than our sexuality. We have hearts, we have minds, and when we can integrate, we end up with something very, very different, very, very healing, and very, very supportive on both sides of the fence. So with the males, if we lived in a society, pretend, that really supported our 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 12-year-old boys, to show them how to take this very uncomfortable physical urge and circulate that energy and bring it up to the heart, bring it up to the head, we find that there is something that circulates this way that's really healing. It's an incredible vital energy that has almost unlimited ability for exploration and is something that is extraordinarily powerful. So power, vitality, unlimited discovery. This is a real beautiful energy force. On the female side of time, if we get that same turn-on energy and they learn how to circulate it and integrate it, we start to see a real autonomousness. We start to see discernment. We start to see attunement, an emotional attunement. Again, female sexuality is so emotionally based that the ability to be emotionally intelligent and find that right emotional intelligence or attunement comes in when it starts to circulate in a really healthy way. So the baseline is that when our sexuality is separate and really differentiated, not integrated from our whole system, we end up with some pretty toxic and challenging things. When that sexuality, exactly the same energy, is brought into integration, is brought into a kind of supportive system, it becomes an immense ally that can profoundly heal us and actually evolve us into human beings who have a whole sense of being able to be turned on in every chakric center. So we can just be fully alive and fully turned on as beings. So that's the goal. That's where we would head to with our sexuality.
Yeah, so on that note, my question is, because we're all, I would imagine most of us here, because we're on the path of or have awakened to our true natures, and you're sketching out these archetypes, identified as male, identified as female, sexual archetypes, and how that's all really biologically wired. And I still can sit with the question of, if we awaken to our true natures, which is a movement of clarity and a movement of genuine love, how does that affect our sexuality? And why is it that we can still see really awake teachers capable of great harm and sexual misconduct? So how does the movement of awakening affect our sexual natures, and how is this possible? I think that's the question that a lot of us have. We want to believe that clarity is clarity, living in the heart is living in the heart, but we see over and over and over again that there's a lot of misconduct going on.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think every one of us have been very much experiencing misconduct in all kinds of areas from awakened beings, whether it's financial misconduct, relationship misconduct, sexual misconduct. But obviously our focus here is on the sexual misconduct. And, my point, Brooke's point, is that our industry, the industry of health and wellness experts, including spiritual leaders, is of course the largest violators on the planet. But it also allows for an opportunity for us to be some of the biggest movements of change because of the impact that we can have. So the main reason misconduct happens is lack of awareness. Right? Period. That's what happens for all of us. Wherever we're blind is where we get sideswiped. Right? And there's a setup inside of that for us to be blind. The setup is that we have the same wounding that we have in our hearts is what we have in our sexuality. So the wounding of, I'm not safe, I don't belong, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable. These are the belief systems that are completely conditioned into our systems at our heart level and shut us down. They exist also in our sexuality. So when we awaken into, however we awaken, I mean, it's a really general world. Sometimes we just awaken into spiritual concepts, which is a really beautiful liberation. Sometimes we awaken into moments of pristine clarity, and that's a really beautiful liberation. Sometimes we have momentary liberations into original nature, and that's life transforming, and it's more happiness than you will have ever known, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's abiding, but it is an awakening. Or we can have a permanent awakening into original nature. But at every one of those places, we physically become turned on creatures. And it has a lot to do with being so present and so alive and so many senses absolutely turned on. In any stage of an awakening, we find ourselves more here, more engaged, more connected. And that means every one of these beautiful sense organs just a little more dialed up. And so with that state of this ongoing turn on, which is totally beautiful and absolutely necessary for that awakening to be fulfilling, we can activate that wounding that's sitting there. So there's an old adage that says, a new love will trigger all the pain of the old loves. And really, it's very real in a quantum mechanic aspect, in the sense of you open up a system and things start flooding out that were tucked behind those closed doors. And that is incredibly true about our sexuality. Like, there's a secret. I don't know why it's a secret. I don't know why everyone's not talking about it. But it's like, you get to some level of awakening and you're so fucking turned on. Like, do you guys know what I'm talking about? Like, say, like, that, like, turned on, right? Like, wow. And then there's a ton of energy flowing through our system, right? It's flowing through our crowns. It's flowing through our hearts. And it's flowing through our genitals. And there's an incredible rush of energy. And so whether you know it or not, that spiritual leader at the top of the room is a giant boner. Whether that's like a girl boner or a boy boner, that's a giant boner, right? I'm just like, whew, this energy is flying through. And so as that wakes up, as that opens up, all the wounding that is sitting there comes rushing out. And in the historical perspective of spirituality, it has been largely to avoid the body, largely to avoid being turned on, largely to avoid boners. But this isn't real. This isn't true. This is a moralistic or ethical storyline built for collective consciousness to function better and be more controlled. But it's not necessary as we begin to liberate ourselves. We get to see that these levels of morality or these levels of these kinds of storylines are repressive more than liberating and unnecessary. And so one of the biggest traps and problems we have is that standing in front of you is a beloved teacher who has opened the doorway to such liberation for you. And it is somebody that in a million areas and moments you trusted and felt yourself incredibly surrendered to. And when challenged up against your own limitations or conditioning, it was the guidance of that leader that helped you move through that. And so it is very hard to recognize if that leader has wounding in their sexuality and in their turned on state with all that energy running, some level of I am not worthy, which every one of us has, and I'm not worthy lives outside of us in a very grabby way, right? We need to be seen. We need to be valued. We need to be needed. We need to be wanted. It's very hard for us to imagine that the leader in front of us has that and is moving that way. And so we end up with very similar movements where we've got primarily a male leader who's very turned on. A wounding of not worthy is there. Being totally blind, they're not looking at it. We get this grabby energy moving forward, and we get traditionally a female devotee, but it absolutely could be a male devotee, being really entranced by wanting to be needed, by wanting to be seen, by wanting to be special, and leaning towards something that is a little wacky. We can sense inside of ourselves, it's not clean, it's a little wacky, but we're leaning towards it because of this situation where the leader is our guru, our parent, our massive support, and misconduct sits there. And, sorry, I don't have any water. Does anybody have any water? Oh, it's empty. Yes, thank you. Yes. Yay. I like the color.
We're good. We had a water rescue.
Yeah, we've had a water rescue. Does everyone take a water break for a moment? This is a hot room.
I know.
Yeah.
Kiran came straight from a giant traffic jam with an accident. Straight in.
Yeah, so, can I say anything? Where are we?
Yeah.
Okay.
This thing starts in 5 minutes.
All right.
Okay. Do you feel like in 5 minutes,
Yeah.
either guiding ourselves into some of that experience of
Yes.
connecting and or form about accountability?
I'm happy to go past 5 minutes. This is very interesting.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you.
Good. We thank you all for being here. We've got tough competition out there. And it's so beautiful that you're joining us for this conversation. We have two options right now. The road veers
You don't have to
in
shout.
two directions. One is that we can do a tiny little puja, which is to say an experiential movement where we can just tap into the sexual energy ourselves and feel what it feels like to flow that energy and start to integrate that energy. So we can do that. And, or we can just talk amongst ourselves around where the solutions can come from, because we clearly need a lot more forums. We need a lot more dialogues. We certainly need dialogues where the survivors are involved or invited to the conversation. And we need to hear from everybody. And we need that puja. We could probably do a bit of both. Okay, puja? All those who want pujas, say aye. Awesome.
I'm voting puja too.
Okay. All those who want both, say aye. Oh, God bless you. I want both too. Because I do want to hear from you. I do want to hear what you have to say. Question?
I started at almost 3.5 years ago, and I'm leading everything. And it seems like, it's all coming from the heart, and it's like, people are just coming to me, and they're like, I love you, I love you, I love you, because I'm in my power. And I'm like, oh my God, okay. Like everyone's coming with their stuff. So it's like, how do I harness that and not project that,
Yeah, great.
stuff because I'm your savior. Because obviously I'm not. I'm just letting whatever comes through come.
Okay, this is a great point, and this is a great point for everybody to realize, right? Because one of the main reason that I was overly abused. So it's very transparent in my story if you go look at my work, but I was the woman who was like molested on a plane ride or couldn't get across a grocery store without someone trying to like pin her into a corner, like constant for me, and really created from my early childhood experience, and it just sort of mirroring through my life. So the way that turned around for me was when I began to step back instead of step in. So it's that simple. Like, I was raised in a household with really wacky people. And as a female with this sort of need to be needed, in the feminine version of that, I was trained to resource wackiness. So if stuff was weird, my instinct was to lean towards it, like to bring in some resource or to bring in some attention to see what was going on. And more than one time in my life, that's where literally I got grabbed, literally where I got pulled off. So when I figured out energetically how to sense, how to trust and attunement to see something a little wacky for my own personal attunement, and how to like step back from that and sort of be able to be separate, was a massive difference. And that's literally the energetic component that turned a place where I was being overly affected to no longer affected. And I've always run the problem. I'm overseen. I'm overseen in a room. I'm overseen a lot. And so learning how to pull my energy back was really important. And I feel like we need to train all of our women to do that. We need to train our children. We need to train our sisters. We need to train our daughters and our nieces and our whatever. We need to train the girls to step back energetically. It is not their way at all. And we need to train the boys that it is totally fine to have these physical urges and to have these fantasies and to have these turn-ons. And in no way is this shameful. This is a biological movement that can be harnessed into something so healing and so incredibly nourishing and valuable. But so long as we keep shaming men for not understanding consent, for having a fantasy life that is, air quote, not important, we run into some problems. So, did I answer your question? What does it mean when you're answering a question and they leave in the middle? I guess. What's that? She's a volunteer working. And she has to work. Okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, so in both cases, right, it means that we need some awareness and we need some dialogue and we need some language, and it's incredibly hard for us to just learn to talk about sex, about our sexuality, about our sexual desires, and to put words on it and to put language on it is so difficult. It's very squirmy. It's very hard, and it takes a lot of practice hours, but this is what an awareness practice needs to include. So let's do a puja. Let's do a little awareness practice. Okay. So just let your feet touch the floor and be very comfortable. We're all friends here. And let your breath come into your beautiful bellies. You may not have as juicy a belly as mine, but it's going to be as beautiful. So, for the men, your sexual center is in your testicles. And if you bring your awareness to your testicles, there is something so lovely, so delicious. It's a big pool of sexual energy. And for the ladies, it's going to be in front of the pubic bone. So if you go right to the front of the pubic bone, you're going to find a luscious pool of delicious, sparkly sexual energy. Now, bringing your awareness to that part of your body might feel triggery. And it might feel like yucky. And just be aware of that. Let that be part of the energy that's very welcome. So it may be delicious for you to touch that base of energy, or it may be a little triggery. Both are welcome. And you're just going to take a second to see. Now, sexual energy has a number of beautiful, beautiful things. One is that it's very sparkly and alive and vital. The other is that it has a yummy quality. Yummy meaning it feels like you could spend some time there. And this is not unlike the energy of source energy. So those of you that are practiced in very silent meditation or stillness may recognize similar qualities to source energy. Our sexual energy and source energy are very similar. And our sexual energy is just a little more exciting. It's just got a little more intense of a frequency. And this may be new for you. I'm not totally sure where everybody is capacity-wise in this room, but just enjoy either your own triggers or the sensation of this juicy energy. And now, here's something really cool. You can move this energy around your body. So you can actually bring this pool of energy all the way up to your heart, which puts the second chakra, your sacral chakra, which is where all this juicy sexual energy is, whether it's like the testicles or the front of the pubic bone, and you can bring it all the way up to the heart chakra. Those chakras have a harmonic frequency. You can basically just bring the energy up. And as you do it, the energy grows. And that's a good thing. It's a healing energy. Again, it has a lot of similarities to source energy. Now, I can feel some of you have reached the heart, and some of you have hit a few blocks along the way. And that's okay. That's okay. Nobody is ever going to be perfect ever, so we don't have to go there. But it's a practice. And ultimately, as you're playing with your own sexual energy, if you can just even recognize you have the capacity to notice it, to enjoy it, to move it, and if we move it circularly inside of our body, we do not need to move it outside of our body in a grabby, objectifying way. That it is in your hands and in your capacity, and certainly a part of your evolution, to learn how to bring this energy into your system, up, or anywhere else. Now, so stay with your energy, just feeling it, just feeling that lovely sexual energy. Just whatever you can access is good, is fine. Now, in my community, in my programs and how I teach is I focus a lot on healing. And how we heal is we find the physical dense areas of the body where there are tensions, where there are physical blocks. And we apply source energy to those blocks to unravel them. And it works extraordinarily fast as well as really thorough. So we don't go through the emotional stream the way a normal therapist would for healing. We go directly to source energy. Now, one of the cool things is you could do this with sexual energy. You could take your own pool of sexual energy and you could bring it to a blockage. A sore muscle, a density, somewhere where you've got a tension, or you just know is a storehouse of some emotional pain, and you could use that energy to swim it through that area and find yourself healing yourself with this powerful, vital, alive energy. And I just want to invite you to even taking 5 minutes to enjoy your own sexual energy is the beginning of us not being afraid of this energy. not being threatened by it, and certainly not isolating ourselves from it. That part of our wholeness requires connecting and integrating this really healing, juicy, alive, delicious energy bank inside of ourselves. And so I'm going to invite you to see if for the rest of the day you can keep tapping into this energy, to not lose track of it. That this is a vital life force that is part of your beautiful body, your beautiful package. And that it is not threatening. It's not threatening to another person, and it's not threatening to you to access that energy. And just see if throughout the day today, for the rest of the evening while you're here, what is it like to just connect with that energy as you listen to other speakers, as you talk to other people, as you have your dinner, just being in touch with this pool of healing inside of yourself. So thank you.